This is an AVNation special. What we were doing was we were previewing InfoComm 2019, the annual North American Audiovisual Trade Show. Comes your way. Actually happens June 8th through the 14th. The show floor itself is the 12th through the 14th. With me today to talk about all things InfoComm and AVIXA is Dan Goldstein from AVIXA. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Tim. How are you?
I am well. I am well.
Good.
Before we get started, though, you guys do actually have a booth as well as a ton of other stuff that we'll get to. But your booth, people can find out more about AVIXA during the show, is actually next to registration. Technically, the booth number, I think, is L1. But if you find registration there in the front of the Orange County Convention Center, you'll find AVIXA. Let's start, I mean, necessarily in chronological order, but sort of. AVIXA has a number of education classes, not just you guys, but also volunteers who volunteer their time and bring you education. They start, though, on the 8th. That's why it goes from the 8th to the 14th.
Right.
Talk for a second about some of those pre-show education courses.
Sure. Well, our 3-day classes, as you probably know, Tim, have been a kind of key part of the InfoComm attendee experience for probably the better part of a decade now. I am consistently amazed, I will tell you, that there are hundreds of people who take an entire week out of their schedule to be with us and do those 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, perhaps take some classes on the Tuesday as well, and then do 3 days at the show. I think there are some people who probably go to the mall on the Tuesday just to take a break. I certainly wouldn't blame them, because I feel like that many days to have 7 days inside the stress concrete of the Orange County Convention Center would certainly be enough, more than enough for me. But yeah, those 3-day classes are an integral part of the show, and I think the one that I would kind of draw attention to is, for the purposes of this conversation, is the newest one, our 3-day class on design thinking, which we ran for the first time in Vegas, and it's run by one of our volunteers, Lisa Perrine. And actually, interestingly, I'm going to kind of contradict myself, because this is the one class where we take our students out of the convention center for some of the time, and they go and look at real world AV installations, and then come back and talk about their experience and the difference between design thinking and, say, our tech tours, the tech tours that we run, very successfully, also a very kind of popular part of the InfoComm experience, is that those design thinking students are not experiencing, or certainly not encouraged to experience, those AV projects as though they were technicians. They are encouraged to take off their technician's hat and put on a different hat, which is a hat worn by an ordinary visitor to that, whether it's a museum or a retail project or a theme park, wherever it is that we're taking people. And don't ask me where we're taking them, because I don't know. But I think that's what's different. That's what's different about these design thinking classes, is that we want people to in a sense walk a mile in our customers' shoes, and actually experience AV in an installation as if they had paid their $25, or considerably more probably if it's a theme park, and we're judging their experience not in the context of how cool the AV is, or how clever the installation is, or how tidy the wiring or the rack building is, but in terms of the value that you get from it as a consumer. And so we started it in Vegas with I think 25 or 30 people, all new. I think we're already way past that number in terms of registrations for this year in Orlando. So it seems like that notion of thinking differently about AV because you're looking at your project through a different lens, through the lens of the consumer rather than the lens of the integrator or the end user, the buyer of the system, but the actual end user, end customer. I think is something that's really starting to resonate with people, and I think it's really cool because I think it gives people something that they can really take away from those 3 days, even if they didn't stay in Orlando, even if all they did was just that 3-day class. I think there are some really, really concrete takeaways that people can derive from that design thinking experience that they can take back to their everyday work and start making use of as soon as they're back to that work.
Very good. Yeah, it was a rather popular one last year. I talked with a couple of people who took that class.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tuesday. It used to be, it was called Super Tuesday for a reason because you have a number of classes there.
We do.
Shameless plug. I'm helping out with one of the ones called Emerging Trends.
Excellent. Good.
But yeah, but talk about that one for some. Not Emerging Trends necessarily. But that day seems to be crafted for folks who don't have the week, right? But they're coming in on Tuesday because the trade show floor, the actual floor on Wednesday, they're coming in and they're able to get some education even the day before the show.
Right. Yeah, I think what the Tuesday does increasingly, Tim, is it gives the 3 trade show days a context, okay. Right? So you talk about emerging trends. The InfoComm show floor is huge. It's something crazy, like 1,275 exhibitors across 80 million square feet. And I'm being kind of glib about it, and I shouldn't be because it is a wonderful show floor. Don't get me wrong. But we're also very conscious of the fact, I think, that the show is broad. We showcase a very broad mix of technologies. That's our strength, actually. I think when we compare InfoComm with some of the other kind of smaller niche shows that are out there, it's all under one roof. It's you get the complete picture of all the different technology components that can be a part of an AV project. And we're probably, I truly believe, we are the only show of which that can be said in North America. The challenge, I think, that we face as show organizers, and I think the challenge that some attendees face is, okay, there are all these booths, there are all these brands. Some of the brands I recognize have got some new stuff. Some of the brands I don't recognize that have got some other stuff that's crazy looking, but could just be a major technology trend for the future. But what's the context? Where are the patterns? Where are the themes? If you were to just kind of wander the show floor randomly, I think those things would be maybe quite difficult to identify. They're not obvious. They don't present themselves to you. We do show floor tours, that we segment in different ways to kind of help people through that. But I also think there's some stuff that we do off the show floor, most obviously on the Tuesday, with something like Emerging Trends, where we're talking about how AV, the changing end user requirements of AV, so if you think about it, design thinking is the consumer context. Emerging Trends is the end user buyer context, and how are we as the use case for AV starts to shift for the different vertical markets that buy it. What implications does that have for us as integrators, as systems designers, as service providers, as engineers? And I think that's what Emerging Trends is going to do this year. And then, of course, the other program that we have going on the Tuesday is Tide, our Tide conference. And there, I think we take things another step further in the sense that we certainly are looking at those end user trends. We certainly have plenty of people on the stage there that can offer insight into some of the different ways in which AV is being used. The context there is just a little bit more cutting edge, a little bit more out of the box. So if you think about it as emerging trends as stuff that we can clearly see going on in the mass market, and Tide is really more, okay, here are some possibilities, a little bit more kind of future thinking. And if you want to be, whether you're a technology manager in an enterprise or on a campus, or you're an integration firm owner, or you're a consultant, and you sort of feel that you're already pretty plugged in to the changing end user landscape, and you're kind of you're pretty cool with what's going on there, I think Tide is where you go next. Tide is your next level of, okay, but if I really want to be at the cutting edge, if I really want my company or my business or my enterprise to be thinking differently about how we use AV, that's where you go. So I think there's a really nice interplay between those two events. They're both in the convention center this year for the first time, which I think is important. And funnily enough, we actually expect a little bit of interplay between the attendees of the two events once they have concluded at the end of Tuesday, because they're going to be very close to each other for the first time.
Well, you're also doing something different with Tide. This is the third year for Tide to happen. You actually started it. It was in Orlando the very first year. You're keeping the Tide set up, and you're utilizing that because it's a very creative set. I've been to a number of the Tide conferences, very creative set. But you guys are using that throughout the week for other sessions.
We are. Yeah, we are, Tim, and it's a great point, because one of the new things that we're doing this year with a series of rooms, which we're calling showcase rooms, is that we want the attendees, the people who buy our seminar and workshop package. That's the package that gets you access to all of our shorter sessions through during the Tuesday and on the show days. We want them to do a couple of different things. Number one, we want them to experience maybe a higher level of AV design than they're used to getting in our training rooms. So I think we've got a number of rooms, for example, where we are actually designing the space according to some of our own AVIXA and ANSI approved industry standards for the first time, which it kind of sounds a bit crazy. It's like, hang on a second, AVIXA, why haven't you been doing this for years? Good question, but I think this is one of the ways in which we're kind of investing in the show. It's certainly not a cheap thing for us to do. It's not just money. It's not just spending money on equipment. It's also the time and the attention to detail that work needs in terms of making sure that we're standards compliant. But we want people to clearly experience what those standards can do to a training room or a learning space. And then the other thing I think that we want people to do, in addition to experiencing a different level of AV, is we want people to experience spaces that are designed to encourage different styles of learning and different ways of sharing insight. We've traditionally been quite conservative, I think, in the way that we have set up our training rooms. There's been an instructor at one end of the room. There's been a PowerPoint deck. There's been a lapel mic, and there's been a room full of students with binders and desks and so forth. We're not going to stop doing that. A lot of people find value in that, and I think that's great. But when we have our own education department here, as you know, and one of the things that they're clearly seeing, and I think a lot of our attendees not just in the education vertical, but in the corporate vertical as well, in corporate training. So not just the education market. We're just seeing people teaching and learning in different ways that are more about group learning, that are more about insight sharing, that are more about discussion, more about interactivity. And so we're using a number of spaces, like I say, these showcase rooms to enable people to experience that. And as we started to look at it logistically, we kind of thought, well, hold on a second. Instead of building a beautiful Tide set with wonderful creative use of AV and staging and lighting and so forth, just for one day and then just tearing it down at the end of Tuesday, let's have it there. Let's have it there for all 4 days, for the Tuesday for Tide and then for the 3 show days, So that it'll be a little bit modified, I think, in a couple of ways. Obviously, it's going to be branded differently, but we want people who are just purchasing our seminar and workshop package to experience that design as well as part of that showcase room package. So that's the thinking behind it, and it's really, really exciting. I think it's like I say, not a cheap thing to do. Definitely something that a for-profit trade show company would not do, and a great example for me of what a non-profit association will find resources to do in the interest of educating and informing and entertaining our attendees in new and hopefully really valuable ways.
Absolutely. All right, before I let you go, we'll actually get to the show floor itself. Again, what we've talked about so far is June 8th through the 11th.
Right. What about the show days?
Center Stage is back again. A pretty popular segment of the show floor. Center Stage is pretty well in the center of the show floor. You've got a number of, I'm not going to call them pavilions. On the show map, and if you go to infocommshow.org, you'll find a link to the map. It's laid out, but there are a couple of color-coded areas that you guys have highlighted. Audio is one of them, unified communications, collaboration's another one, UCC, digital signage. Yeah. And then you've got all sorts of other areas. You can type in the name of the company or the organization you're looking for. Like you type in AVIXA or you type in Center Stage, and it'll zoom you in on that. Let's talk about the show floor and what folks are going to experience. I mentioned one of the events already, or one of the highlights, that Center Stage, continuing education and continuing presentations all 3 days. But what are some of the things that you're most excited about those 3 days of the show floor?
Yeah, it's great. I think funnily enough, Tim, maybe unwittingly, you sort of touched on what I think is really the critical thing about our show floor. Those colored areas that you can see, right, that we map out, digital signage, unified communications, audio, event production, they all started as pavilions, right? They started as really small, very kind of niche, literally physical niches, corners of the show, back of the show floor, or, little kind of incubator areas where a few, relatively small number of very courageous exhibitors, pitched their tent, and then we as a marketing group, here at the association, went out and tried to make sure that we were bringing attendees who would see relevance in these new technologies or these adjacent technologies. They've all now become, over the years, no pun intended, integral to what the AV industry is all about, right? So so they're not. I think we do still call them pavilions, but to me they're not pavilions. They are, as you say, they are absolutely integral part of the show floor. I really like the show floor in Orlando. I think there's a really nice flow that you can do, all the way from kind of digital signage at one end through to the screens start out quite big, with this direct view LED and so forth. Then you get to kind of smaller screens. It's smaller rooms. It's AV meeting rooms, huddle spaces, conferencing, collaboration, and then you kind of move into audio and that aspect, and it starts to get bigger again. You start to go from white speakers to bigger black speakers, and then you get into the lighting and the staging and the event production. It's you almost kind of do this, I think, in terms of scale and application, and I think it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful. I said it was big and confusing, but actually, there is a logical flow to it, I think, which is really, really nice. And then, as you point out, in the center, you've got Center Stage, where I think you've got some of that kind of cutting edge discussion that you experience at Tide. But in a much more, I guess, a much more kind of spontaneous setting where you don't, the level of commitment that we're requiring of you as an attendee is a little bit lower. It definitely is, that the kind of place where, you kind of think, wow, I've got 15 minutes between appointments, 10 minutes before appointments. I could really take the weight off my feet. This presentation looks interesting. You know, there's somebody here with something, got some cool slides up on their on their deck. This looks. I would much rather people did that in an educational setting than simply, I don't know, just flake out on a couch somewhere,
Yeah.
And check their email. I would much rather people actually had an industry context or a technology context or an application context that genuinely enhances their show experience, than just be, sitting in a lobby somewhere. And I think we've been very intentional with Center Stage this year. We're engaging what we call the creative community, creatives, very, very broadly. It's a very, very broad mix of people. All kinds of people refer to themselves as creatives. They're people who don't actually need, particularly, they don't need to be convinced of the value of AV. They already see it, they're already using it, but they're using it in ways that are, in some cases, I think, quite different from some of the traditional applications of AV that we see. And so that group that we're actually engaging with, away from InfoComm, away from the show floor at different events through the year in different locations, quite a lot of those people, those thought leaders, are coming to Center Stage and speaking at Center Stage. And right at the end of the week, almost a kind of bookend the week, I think on the Friday afternoon, we're having what we call a creative cohort lab, where there's a critical mass of those speakers are going to be assembling at Center Stage and having a bigger conversation about the connectivity, if you like, again, no pun intended, the connectivity between the creative community and the AV community. And I think that's going to be really interesting. Completely new thing. Might be a complete bust. Who knows? But I think if you're there, if you're one of the many people who stay until the end on the Friday, don't have a flight out until Friday evening or even Saturday morning out of Orlando. A great way, I think, maybe to end your show experience in a way that is informal, not pressured, but hopefully still really valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mr. Goldstein, if somebody wants to find out more information about InfoComm or about AVIXA, how do they do that?
InfoCommShow.org is the show site. AVIXA.org is the association site.
All right, very good. Dan Goldstein from AVIXA. Thank you so much, sir. For us, for AVNation, you can go by the website, AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv. And follow along as we also head to Orlando June 8th through the 14th. The show itself is the 12th through the 14th. We'll bring you interviews and all the new AV professional gear that folks will be releasing that week. All that and more at AVNation.tv. That's AVNation.tv.